I'm going to quickly plug Englishmen for Exclusivity Against Equality, because I think the Tory party, and any of you that are interested in infiltrating the halls of power to change their attitude on why we should have exclusivity, meritocracy, fairness, prudence, and justice rather than equality, which every social justice member of the Tory cabinet seems to be talking about in the last couple of years, I think you should all give this a read. So if you'd like to subscribe to lotusceasers.com, you can listen to content like this. So Jake, why don't you run us through why you're dispirited with the Tory party and what you're doing to change it?
Well, I think before I go into that too deeply, I mean, the point about equality is something that really frustrates me, because a lot of people say things like, I prefer equality of opportunity over equality of outcome, forgetting, of course, that you're still talking about equality for one thing, but also that you actually can't have equality of opportunity without equality of outcome at some point, especially if you're talking about things like inheritance tax or basically any form of tax. But in terms of the actual election race, there was a really interesting article that caught my eye, which was this by Aris Rousnos in Unheard, called Britain Needs Macmillan, Not Thatcher. And in case you couldn't tell from the picture, Liz Truss as a sort of pseudo-Thatcher or a sort of warmed-up Thatcher zombie is not Aris's choice.
I don't know, the next Call of Duty looks great to me.
Well, they're all painting the tanks forest green instead of sand, desert sand, in case you didn't see that. Now, the point with regards to this article is that we should stop trying to reanimate Thatcher. We should start talking about things that are more pressing concerns. I think Aris is obviously an excellent author. I love Aris as an author, and one of the reasons I quite liked this article in general was that Macmillan and Quinton Hogg, when they were in charge of the Conservative Party, basically said something along the lines of, if you do not give the people social reform, they will give you social revolution. It's a very important point to remember. But in my mind, this article is the same issue, just dressed up a bit differently. We're still looking for solutions to now in the past, and we need to think creatively. We need to start thinking about different ideas, and we're just not doing that. We're stuck in an ideological rut. We've got the last 3 years of essentially grand statist projects that have failed miserably. I mean, the furlough scheme, one thing I noticed was that every single Tory candidate for the leadership praised the furlough scheme, forgetting that that's basically created the situation that we're in. Yeah. And you know, for all of his faults, at least Boris Johnson had an idea of a sort of grand vision of Britain. I don't know what that vision was, but he always talked about this, you know, this grand idea of vision. But Sunak doesn't have that. You know, I don't even know what Sunak actually believes in. And Truss called state targets of house building Stalinist. You know, we're still stuck in this kind of Thatcherite miasma of the last 40 years. But to give it its real name, it's Blairism. Because not only is it this kind of reheated Thatcherite economics, it's the same things that you were talking about in terms of social justice and equality and these sorts of things. And I quite liked well, as you know, I was a big supporter of Kemi Badenoch, and I quite liked her only, well, not her only, but her great idea of breaking up the Treasury and essentially making it responsive to the Prime Minister and therefore the country, as opposed to the economy.
Did you think so? She seemed quite tepid on Sunak's economic record. She was also one of the people that fell in line saying the furlough scheme was a good idea rather than just a pilot scheme for universal basic income. She was a junior Treasury Minister at the time. Do you think that those structural reforms would have improved the operation, or do you think she would have sort of talked the party line on economics as they've already stood?
It's a difficult question in the sense that I don't really put a huge amount of premium in the Prime Minister to change things as much as people think. Right. And I completely sympathise with the point that, you know, she may have just been talking the party line and towing the party line and gotten into number 10 and then just been like every other Tory. That may have happened, and we can never know. True. But at least she was... She reminded me of Thatcher, not in the sense of Truss in the kind of reheated economic policies, but in the sense of having at least a vision of system change. That was the really exciting thing about Kemi for me, was that she actually talked about system change.
It's funny, actually, because we are generally not revolutionaries as natural conservatives, but we've been so beset by the Blairist paradigm for how many years that it does require a pretty intensive overhaul culturally and systemically. It's funny because Harry and I were covering Michael Knowles' book, Speechless, Controlling Words and Controlling Minds, and he said conservatives almost need a form of repressive tolerance just because we've been so beset by it that in order to get back to a place where we have a tradition to remember and conserve, we need to use the left's own tactics against them and just be obstinate and say no. So it would be quite interesting to see if she would have gone in there and taken a jackhammer to the existing order, but yeah, we won't see that for, or at least quite a while, because I think she's gonna have a career around. I'm still skeptical on her, but yeah, I was gonna say if we can go to the next link, obviously she was snubbed. Do you think this spells an ill fate for the Tory party actually listening to the dissenting base who have been quite unhappy?
I think one thing that's been particularly concerning around this is the ignorance towards the grassroots and a sort of willingness to ignore us. You know, are you a member of the party?
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw that article by, I think it was Daniel Finkelstein in the Times, where he basically said, don't give the members a vote, just stick with the MPs. And I mean, for one thing, I would be really interested to hear if he'd say the same thing were Labour to be having this problem. But also, what kind of world are you living in where that is a good idea? I couldn't even work it out.
There is very much a managerial elitist attitude. I remember there was an article in Con Home and a bit of inside baseball. I was actually in the final 2 for the Con Home editor position.
Oh, really?
At the start of this year, yeah. And when I went into the interview, they said, "Is there anything you don't like?" And I said, "Well, can I complain about one of your columnists for a minute?" Because there was a guy who said, he said something similar along the lines of that party members shouldn't have a say over his PM, but he also said that we shouldn't have a vote on vaccine passports; they should just be passed by fiat. And so there is very much this attitude of having no principle, but there is a job, we must do this, rather than having someone in the room going, okay, why, how, is this a good idea, is it going to work, and is it moral? Because morality seems to have been abolished from our political discourse and sort of our toolkit of policy making.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we say, this is just, this will just disillusion more of the grassroots in my mind, because I don't know anyone that actually likes Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss for who they are.
No.
That they're very boring. Is the easiest word.
There is an enthusiasm vacuum. I've said now I am reluctantly trust, even because although she's a blithering idiot, some people around her might cut my taxes.
It's not a bad idea.
For the next 2 years before we get into a war, I might be a bit richer.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I don't know what Rishi Sunak's foreign policy approach is. Do you?
No, I do know he's very cozied up to China because he's the only candidate that's been formally endorsed by a Chinese press outlet.
Really?
Yeah, there was, I can't remember which paper it was, but they have actually come out and said he has the most pragmatic and diplomatic approach to Chinese relations, which basically means he's going to bend over backwards and acquiesce to them. Because, of course, his family have, through InfoScience, have ties to the World Economic Forum and data gathering. And he's also a fan of digital currency. So he's just he's a terrible totalitarian that people keep trotting out as somehow fiscally responsible and sensible, as if he didn't get us into this position in the first place. I remember Liam Fox earlier, I believe it was on GB News, turned around and said, "Oh, the people haven't earned tax cuts yet." It's like, sorry, mate. I earned the money in the first place that you're now seizing. The government do not control the economy. Thank you very much. But yeah, you're right in identifying that this is a very hegemonic Blairite paradigm that's permeated the Conservative Party. Yeah.
But the issue is that fundamentally the right has become sclerotic. It doesn't have any new ideas. It hasn't had any new ideas for a long time. And the reason it's, in my opinion, it's not had any new ideas for a long time is it's led by the nose by the left. It, like we say, it's in this Blairite paradigm that it only ever responds to. You could even see it, even when David Cameron was Prime Minister, Labour would push and push and push for higher taxes, higher spending, all this sort of thing. As a way to kind of look moderate, they would almost go halfway. But of course, as any negotiator will tell you, that's how you get what you want.
Yes, yeah. That's Trump's big ask tactic originally, yeah.
So I don't know what the best way to approach this, but fundamentally, and what's really interesting is that it wasn't always like this, right? The right used to be quite full of ideas. In fact, for the second half of the 20th century, the right was extremely energetic in terms of ideas. You had the emergence of the think tank Archipelago in the 1940s. You had the Mont Pelerin Society, the Adam Smith Institute, the Institute for Economic Affairs, loads and loads of actually quite grassroots organisations. And admittedly, economically, they were all quite similar in that they were after smaller taxes and a smaller state and all these sorts of things. But a lot of them approached it differently. You know, some were sort of monetarist and some were just basically, you know, just eviscerate the state. And eventually it kind of like a combination is what won. But this has all been turned on its head because a lot of these institutes and think tanks have become institutionalized. You know, they're now part of the state apparatus as opposed to being outside of it and offering ideas, which is what Curtis Yarvin, or as you might know him, Mencius Mollberg, talked about, is the cathedral, which I believe we have a link.
The next link, yeah. Thank you, John.
So the cathedral is, I mean, he said there, it's just a short way to say journalism plus academia. It's the intellectual institutions at the centre of modern society. So when we talk about the Blairite consensus, it's not just economics and it's not just social justice. It's also this sort of incredibly cohesive network of people that think the same, go to the same institutions and produce the same ideas and feed off one another. You know, they report on what each other said, and as a result, they kind of create the image of consensus where it doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, it's almost like decentralized cultural hegemony and a conspiracy of interest linked together by profit and job security.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's also interesting. I've always liked the term cathedral just because it reminds me of when Nietzsche compared the death of God. Every church will become a sepulchre, and it'll just be this empty building that's slowly collapsing. And then I was listening very recently to Dennis Prager talk about cut flower culture.
Oh yeah.
Or cut flower theology, and it's the idea that you have this beautiful flower, but when you sever the stem, when you de-God the Christian ethos, which is the underlying morality of the West and Enlightenment liberalism, which is the paradigm we're sort of trapped in, then that will die over time, and it looks beautiful, but it's slowly withering, and eventually it will just crumble and that beauty will fade away. And I think the cathedral, funnily enough, is this new hollowed out, de-godded sepulchre of where they have, like the money changers which occupy the floor, they've set up shop in what was formerly our house, and they can't reach the same heights, and they can't reconstruct the cathedral because it doesn't have the same beauty. They don't have the same idea. I remember Tucker Carlson even spoke about recently that I'm attracted to conservatism because it built beautiful things, and it's self-evident in that. Whereas George Orwell said in Thoughts on the Common Toad that leftist architecture is stripped of all beauty so that it can refocus the worship of your sentiment away from religion and towards the state. They've definitely occupied something the right have built. And so it's on us to reclaim it and almost re-God it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think another reason that I find the word cathedral so perfect for this is partly of what cathedrals were initially intended to do architecturally, which was to bring the sublime into reality. And people often misunderstand the sublime in the sense that they think it's, you know, it's a good thing. But actually, if you read Edmund Burke's Intellectual Origins of the Sublime and the Beautiful, he says that the sublime is a sort of fixing moment of terror. And when you think about the cathedral, it is terrifying. It is everywhere, but also it's overawing to the point where you look at this and you go, how could I possibly fight this? You know, you think, well, if I walk into a cathedral, which stone do I start pulling it down by? Not that I would, but that's the same problem we're facing here. Which stone do we start pulling it down by? And there isn't necessarily an answer. We just have to assault the whole thing.
Yes. So, yeah. But should we not care about what the leftists say about us? After all, there was this famous piece, if we go on to the next link, John, about why conservatives, especially young Tories who go to party conference, should be shamed into not having standards and not dressing and possibly not having a bit of fun. I mean, Casey Byrne down the bottom of there, we're going to ignore his dress sense, but looks like a tangerine. But I don't understand why particularly the conservative apparatus are still captured and enamoured by it, despite this being a perfectly humorous piece of writing. This is exactly the kind of thing that they will be shamed into foregoing standards for, and I don't quite get why they acquiesce to the leftist cathedral so much.
I have no idea. I mean, when you invited me here today, at no point did we discuss dress codes. No. And yet I still turned up in a suit.
Yeah, it was just the expectation.
It's the expectation.
I'm still trying to shame everyone into wearing a tie. I see your YouTube comments. I want some standards around here.
But, you know, one thing about dress is that it's not only a statement of what you think about yourself, it's a statement of what you think about other people.
Right.
And if you are not dressed well, you're saying to people, at least if you're not dressed well in public, you're saying to people around you, I don't care what you think about me. And obviously that's not exactly a radical observation, because that was basically the punk movement of the 80s, and it's the liberation movement of the 70s and 60s. But we should care what people around us think about us, because it reflects what we think about their worth, right? If I walk into an interview and I'm not dressed as well as I possibly could be, my statement is, I don't care that you think this is worth your time, so I think it's not worth my time, so I'm not going to get the job. It's as simple as that. But this isn't like a boomer, you should dress for the job you want kind of statement. This is just a simple way of saying you should treat people around you with respect, and dress is part of that. And I don't understand why, first of all, why we should be demonized for dressing well. I'm not necessarily saying that wearing a suit is dressing well, full stop. You need to have a good fitting suit. But also, for God's sake, in that picture, there's a bloke with Union Jack socks on. What's wrong with that? That's just a bit of fun.
Well, it's not just a bit of fun. It's the old George Orwell quote of leftists would sooner steal from a poor box and sing "God Save the King," and it just applies here. It's any opportunity to demonise a bit of patriotism, the little that there actually was at Conservative Party conference, rather than it just being a debaucherous orgy. So you're doing something about it.
Hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. And we'll go to the next link of where you can actually read. I've contributed to the site before, but you can read not only Mallard's print magazine, but also their digital publications, where they cover not only internal Conservative Party apparatus, but a remoralisation of conservative ideas in the British sphere. And, of course, you provide a platform to a lot of particularly young people's voices that are up and coming to really work out their perspectives. I know Sam Martin has some incredibly explosive columns, some of which we might even get in trouble for reading out on YouTube, but they are incredibly entertaining.
Absolutely. I think if you were to keep going, or maybe on the second page, there is actually an article by Sam which is called "Squandering a Political Revolution," and he basically says almost what we've been saying for the last 20 minutes, which is that the Johnson government has squandered the revolution it was offered in I think it may be slightly further down. That's it, squandering a revolution.
I remember the quote from this. He said, I can't wait to choose between accidentally starting a war with Liz and definitely starting a war with Tom Tugendhat. Spoiled for choice.
But I think as well, one thing that I'm particularly proud of with the Mallard, as you say, is we're forefronting younger voices, and that's a great thing. I know obviously you were with Young Voices for a while, and we had a lot of young voices write for us, which was absolutely fantastic. And there is this network emerging, but also hopefully, as people saw from scrolling through that front page, there's a huge variety of ideas here. We're not just talking about economics. In fact, I think there's like one economic argument in this whole month so far. The rest of it's more constitutional, cultural, system change, and all these sorts of things. A few articles on abortion, which is quite brave.
One of my hot topics, yes.
Absolutely. And, I think as well, Jess Gill, who obviously we know,
yes,
wrote an article, Conservatives Against Equality, which brings us nicely back to the point of saying, actually, Conservatives shouldn't be about equality. Conservatives should be about natural talent and meritocracy and getting on in life.
Yeah. Unfairness is not what we're about. Instead, fairness means that not everyone gets the same. It's about competition and proportionality. Yeah. So what's standing in the way of this?
Well, I think, as I say, we have to ask now, where are the rights ideas coming from? And I think it is actually no longer think tanks, but actually institutions and media like ours, like Lotus Eaters, the Mallard, Unheard, Spiked, loads of, for lack of a better word, outside the tent weeing in, rather than inside the tent, where you're captured by the institutions of power. If I could put it to you, I don't know if necessarily this is a good or bad thing. Do you think that we should be looking to, like you say, recapture the cathedral, or should we stay outside of it?
This is the difference between the bazaar and the cathedral that Yarvin's constructed. I understand the desire to want a decentralised bazaar. The problem I will always have is, are the communists who believe in global revolution, who will never let up, going to let us get away with it? And so I do think we need to entrench ourselves in a structure, as it were. And I say this as someone who is not very good with rules. I'm probably the least orthodox personality-wise of Conservatives, even though I understand the value immensely. And so I think hopefully there's a happy medium where things like the Mallard, of course you've got the magazine there that people can subscribe to. This is the latest edition, even with a Jack Posobiec column. Hopefully things like Lotus Eaters, thank you all for subscribing. We can change the culture to a point of where the people who are best suited to infiltrate these institutions carry our ideas with them. Because at the moment, if we can go on to the next link and just briefly discuss this, this is the problem we're facing. This is the reason that people aren't receptive in the party. It's because of the civil servants and the deep state, as Boris Johnson even said the other day.
I think one thing that, using that phrase, that the deep state, when Trump used it, obviously people immediately laughed at him because it was Donald Trump. Not necessarily because what he was saying was wrong, because actually, if you were to row back by about 5 years, the left were saying the same thing and have been saying the same thing for a long time, which is that actually there are mechanisms and levers of power that have been captured by a certain interest. It's just they think the interest is capital, whereas we think it tends to be social justice. And actually, I think one of the really beneficial things about this blog is it proves that it's the same thing. Social justice and capital. I mean, I hate the phrase, but what is often referred to now as woke capital, right?
This is ESG scores 101.
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, think tanks, in my mind, are dead by virtue of the fact they've been institutionalized. And
they're spinning their wheels.
They literally are. And I'm really glad that you mentioned the Runnymede Trust earlier, because this article takes particular aim at the Runnymede Trust. So for anyone that doesn't know, and actually as Herbalis points out in this, the Runnymede Trust is quite obscure, but extremely important. So they published a report in 1997, which was basically saying there should be the creation of what came to be the Human Rights Commission, Equalities and Human Rights Commission. Now, the ironic thing was, or not necessarily ironic, but what's interesting is that they recommended the creation of the EHRC, and then the EHRC recommends funding pro-equality charities. The Runnymede then benefits from EHRC recommended funding, so the funding comes from government, so taxpayers like you and I. So the Runnymede Trust has actually created its own income stream, and then, as a result, has an interest in not only not solving the issues it identifies, but identifying new issues that it then has to solve to justify its own existence and get more money.
It's an Ouroboros of taxpayer grievance piracy.
Absolutely. That's actually, I like that.
Yeah, there you go. Trademarked. So, in our efforts to combat this, if you'd like to follow more from Jake, you can go straight to his Twitter. You can also subscribe to the Mallard magazine and read on their website. And also the Mallard has a Twitter where they tweet out their articles every day, and they often do enjoy a bit of indulgence in the meme. And also, can I just congratulate you for naming it after Britain's best duck?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this live hangout here, being the Wisdom in the Book of Songs with Luke, Avery, and Carl there. And if you want to follow what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.